In 1922, a team of archaeologists entered a sealed Egyptian tomb that had remained untouched for more than 3,000 years. Within months, strange things began to happen. One man died from an infected mosquito bite. Another collapsed suddenly with no clear explanation. One visitor reportedly went home and later took his own life. Others died from illness, accidents, or unexplained circumstances. Soon, newspapers around the world began repeating the same terrifying phrase: the curse of the pharaoh. At first, most people dismissed the story as superstition. Ancient Egypt had always fascinated the public. Mummies, pyramids, sealed chambers, hidden treasures. It was easy to believe that the media had exaggerated the story to sell papers. But the deeper you look into what happened after that tomb was opened, the stranger the story becomes. Because the deaths were real, the timing was real, and even today, more than a century later, there is still no single explanation that fully accounts for what happened. For centuries, the Valley of the Kings had been one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. Hidden among the barren hills on the west bank of the Nile, near Luxor, it served as the burial place for Egypt's pharaohs during the New Kingdom. By the late 19th century, archaeologists believed they had already uncovered nearly everything the valley had to offer. Most tombs had been looted long before modern explorers arrived. Others had already been mapped, opened, and documented. The valley was considered exhausted. There was little reason to believe that another royal tomb still remained hidden beneath the sand. But one man refused to accept that conclusion. His name was Howard Carter. Carter had spent years studying ancient Egypt. He was not born into wealth. He was not part of the academic elite. He began as an artist, sketching ancient carvings and paintings for archaeologists. Over time, he developed a reputation for being patient, stubborn, and unusually observant. He believed there was still one tomb left to find, the tomb of Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun was not one of Egypt's great rulers. He became pharaoh as a child. He ruled for only a short time, and he died young. For centuries, he was almost forgotten. Many historians believed his burial site had been lost forever. But Carter noticed something unusual. Artifacts linked to Tutankhamun had appeared in the valley, even though his tomb had never been found. Fragments of pottery, small seals, objects carrying his name. To Carter, these were clues. He believed the tomb had to be somewhere nearby. The problem was money. Searching for a hidden tomb in the Egyptian desert was expensive, and after years of failed attempts, few people still believed Carter's theory. Eventually, he found support from an English aristocrat named Lord Carnarvon. Carnarvon was wealthy, fascinated by archaeology, and willing to finance the search. For years, Carter and his team dug through the valley. Season after season, they found almost nothing. By 1922, Carnarvon was losing patience. He reportedly told Carter he would fund one final season. If they found nothing, the search would end. Then, in early November, workers discovered a stone step cut into the ground. As more sand was cleared away, a staircase emerged. At the bottom stood a sealed doorway. Stamped across the plaster seals were markings linked to Tutankhamun. Carter knew immediately that he had found something extraordinary. News traveled quickly. Lord Carnarvon arrived in Egypt. The entrance was carefully opened. Beyond it was a corridor filled with rubble. At the end of that corridor stood another sealed door. On November 26, 1922, Howard Carter made a small hole in the upper corner of the second doorway. He inserted a candle. Then he looked inside. Later, he was asked if he could see anything. His reply became famous. Yes, wonderful things. Inside the chamber were objects no one had seen for more than 3,000 years. Golden couches shaped like animals, black statues standing guard, chests covered in hieroglyphics, ceremonial beds, jewelry, ivory, weapons. And deeper inside, the burial chamber itself. For the first time in modern history, archaeologists had found a royal Egyptian tomb that was almost completely intact. The discovery shocked the world. Newspapers covered every detail. Photographers arrived. Tourists flooded Egypt. Tutankhamun became an international sensation. But almost immediately, rumors began to spread. Some reports claimed there was a warning written near the tomb. The wording changed depending on the newspaper. One version read, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the king." Another claimed, "Those who enter this sacred tomb shall swift be visited by wings of death." There is no confirmed evidence that these exact words were ever found inside Tutankhamun's tomb. Many historians believe the inscription was invented or exaggerated by journalists. But the idea took hold quickly. Ancient Egypt had long been associated with curses, rituals, and beliefs about the afterlife. The public was ready to believe that disturbing a king's resting place could bring terrible consequences. At first, there was no reason to take those stories seriously. Then Lord Carnarvon died. Carnarvon had been in Egypt only a few months after the tomb was opened. During his stay in Cairo, he was bitten by a mosquito. The bite became infected. While shaving, he accidentally cut the area. The wound worsened. Soon, he developed a serious infection. He was taken to a hospital. Despite treatment, his condition declined rapidly. On April 5, 1923, Lord Carnarvon died. Officially, the cause was blood poisoning, followed by pneumonia. On the surface, it seemed like a tragic but ordinary death. An infected insect bite, a weakened immune system, poor medical treatment. Yet, strange details quickly surrounded the story. According to several reports, at the exact moment Carnarvon died, the lights in Cairo suddenly went out. The entire city reportedly experienced a blackout. Miles away in England, one newspaper claimed that Carnarvon's dog let out a howl and collapsed dead at the same moment. Whether those details were true remains uncertain. Some historians believe they were added later to make the story more dramatic. But once those stories entered the public imagination, the curse narrative exploded. Newspapers around the world began searching for every death connected to the tomb, and before long, they found several. One of the first names often mentioned was George J. Gould. Gould was an American businessman and railroad executive. He visited Tutankhamun's tomb in 1923. Shortly afterward, he developed a high fever. He returned to the French Riviera. His condition worsened. Within days, he died. Then there was Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy Bey, an Egyptian prince who had reportedly visited the tomb. In 1923, he was shot and killed in London by his wife. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed also became part of the story. Reed was the radiologist who examined Tutankhamun's mummy using X-rays. Not long afterward, he became ill and died. Arthur Mace, one of the archaeologists who worked closely on the excavation, also died a few years later after suffering from illness. Sir Lee Stack, the Governor-General of Sudan and a visitor to the tomb, was assassinated in Cairo. Richard Bethel, Howard Carter's secretary, was found dead in bed in London. Bethel's father later died by suicide. The list seemed to grow with each passing year. Every new death added another layer to the legend. Stay with me, because this is where the official explanation begins to collide with the strange reality of what happened. Most scientists reject the idea of a supernatural curse. Their explanation is far more practical. Ancient tombs are sealed environments. They can contain bacteria, mold spores, fungus, and toxic substances that remain trapped for centuries. When archaeologists open those tombs, they may suddenly be exposed to dangerous microorganisms. In some ancient burial chambers, scientists have discovered mold species that can cause severe lung infections. Certain fungi are especially dangerous for people with weakened immune systems. Spores can spread through the air. Once inhaled, they may lead to fever, respiratory illness, and even death. There are also ancient chemicals to consider. Some tombs contain traces of ammonia, formaldehyde, or hydrogen sulfide. In high concentrations, these substances can be harmful. According to this theory, there was never a curse. There was only biology, only hidden contamination inside a sealed environment. On the surface, that explanation makes sense. It explains why some people became ill after entering the tomb. It explains why older individuals or those with existing health problems may have been more vulnerable. But there are still problems with the theory. Because the people connected to the curse did not die in the same way. Some died from infections, others from violence, some from sudden illness, others from completely unrelated causes. And perhaps most importantly, many people who entered the tomb lived long lives. Howard Carter himself survived for nearly 17 years after opening the tomb. He died in 1939 at the age of 64. Dr. Douglas Derry, who examined the mummy, lived for years afterward. Many Egyptian workers involved in the excavation experienced no unusual illnesses at all. If toxic mold was responsible, why did it affect some people and not others? If bacteria caused the deaths, why were the symptoms so different? And why did some deaths happen years after the tomb was opened? That is not how most infections behave. Some researchers believe the answer may lie in psychology. The curse story spread rapidly in newspapers. Once people became convinced that the tomb was dangerous, fear may have intensified existing illnesses. Stress can weaken the body. Anxiety can make symptoms worse. A person who believes they had been cursed may begin to notice every ache, every cough, every unusual feeling. Over time, fear itself can become dangerous. There are real examples of people becoming physically ill because they believed something terrible would happen to them. This is sometimes called the nocebo effect, the opposite of the placebo effect. If a person strongly believes they are in danger, the body can react in powerful ways. Heart rate changes, blood pressure rises, sleep becomes difficult, immune function may decline. For someone already elderly or unhealthy, that stress could potentially contribute to serious illness. But even this explanation leaves unanswered questions, because not everyone who died believed in the curse. Some deaths were sudden, some involved violence or accidents, and some of the most unusual stories remain difficult to explain. One story involved the canary Howard Carter kept during the excavation. According to local workers, Carter owned a yellow canary that was seen as a symbol of good luck. Shortly after the tomb was opened, a cobra reportedly entered Carter's house and ate the bird. To Egyptians, the cobra was a powerful royal symbol. It appeared on the crowns of pharaohs. Many believed the cobra had come as a warning. Another strange detail involved Lord Carnarvon's wound. Some reports claimed that when Tutankhamun's mummy was examined, there was a mark on the pharaoh's face in the same location as Carnarvon's infected mosquito bite. Whether that detail was accurate is still debated, but stories like this kept the legend alive. Each coincidence seemed to reinforce the idea that something beyond ordinary chance was taking place. And then there was the timing. Several of the deaths happened remarkably soon after visiting the tomb. George J. Gould died only months later. Arthur Mace's health declined not long after the excavation. Carnarvon died within a year. The sequence was close enough to feel unsettling. But what makes the story even more interesting is that many experts now believe the curse itself was partly created by the media. At the time, newspapers were competing aggressively for attention. Tutankhamun's tomb was already one of the biggest stories in the world. A curse made it even more irresistible. Writers began collecting every strange event they could find. If a visitor became sick, it was linked to the tomb. If someone died years later, their name was added to the list. Over time, the number of supposed victims became larger and larger. Some lists included more than 20 people. Others included nearly 40. But the definition of who counted as a victim changed constantly. Was it anyone who entered the tomb? Anyone connected to the excavation? Anyone who merely visited Egypt during that period? The more flexible the rules became, the easier it was to find patterns. And humans are naturally drawn to patterns. We search for meaning. We connect unrelated events. We remember the strange details and ignore the ordinary ones. If 10 people visit a tomb and one dies unexpectedly, that death feels significant. But if the other 9 live long lives, those stories are often forgotten. This may be part of the reason the curse story survived. Yet even with that in mind, the mystery remains surprisingly difficult to dismiss. Because this was not just one death, it was a chain of deaths. A sequence of illnesses, accidents, and strange events tied together by one extraordinary discovery. And even now, more than 100 years later, the story still unsettles people. Perhaps that is because ancient Egypt itself feels different from other ancient civilizations. The Egyptians believed deeply in the afterlife. To them, a tomb was not simply a grave, it was a sacred space, a carefully prepared home for eternity. Every object placed inside had a purpose. Every ritual mattered. The dead were expected to continue existing in another world. To disturb that process was not merely disrespectful, it was dangerous. The Egyptians also believed words had power. Inscriptions were not decorative, they were active. They could protect, they could guide, they could warn. Many tombs included texts meant to defend the dead from intruders, not necessarily through physical violence, but through spiritual punishment. Whether modern people believe in such things is almost beside the point. What matters is that the ancient Egyptians believed them. And when a sealed tomb survives untouched for thousands of years, carrying all of those beliefs inside it, it becomes very difficult not to feel a certain unease when it is finally opened. Howard Carter himself rarely spoke publicly about the curse. He generally dismissed it. He preferred facts, artifacts, records. He spent years carefully documenting the tomb and its contents, but even Carter could not completely escape the shadow of the story. Every death brought renewed attention. Every newspaper article kept the legend alive. And over time, Tutankhamun's curse became part of popular culture. Books were written about it. Films were made. The curse became one of the most famous mysteries of the 20th century. Even today, tourists visiting Egypt still ask about it. They still want to know whether there was really something inside that tomb. Something dangerous. Something unseen. Science can explain part of the story. It can explain mold. It can explain infection. It can explain stress and fear. It can explain why newspapers exaggerated the details. But science still struggles with the emotional power of coincidence. Because sometimes a series of events can become so strange, so specific, and so unsettling that they begin to feel like more than chance. Maybe that is exactly what happened after Tutankhamun's tomb was opened. A tragic series of unrelated events, a frightened public, an aggressive media, and a world already fascinated by ancient Egypt. Or maybe there was something else. Not a supernatural force, not a magical curse, but perhaps some kind of consequence we still do not fully understand. Because even now, the deeper you go into the story, the harder it becomes to separate fact from myth. The deaths were real, the fear was real, and the mystery has never fully gone away. Tutankhamun's tomb still sits in the Valley of the Kings. Visitors still walk through its narrow corridors. They still stand before the burial chamber. And they still think about the people who entered before them. The men who believed they were making one of the greatest discoveries in history. Without realizing, they might also be stepping into one of history's most enduring mysteries. So perhaps the real curse was never something hidden inside the tomb. Perhaps the real curse was the story itself. A story powerful enough to outlive everyone involved. A story that continues to spread from one generation to the next, and a story that still leaves behind one uncomfortable question. If it was all just coincidence, why does it still feel so difficult to believe that it was? This has been Mystery Chronicles Archive. The archive never houses.